Hi and welcome to another very exciting tutorial. You've already seen a glimpse of what we're trying to accomplish today in the video on the left, but we're actually not going to create this game in its whole, but we're going to focus on creating a game level instead, only using the SceneKit Editor in Xcode. So what you see on the right is what we are going to create today using only the board tools, the onboard tools of Xcode to create 3D models, to apply nice materials to a ball, and to set up this whole environment with the skybox and the floor and so on. And if you're interested in creating the game that you have seen on the left, then let me know it in the comments below or hit the like button of this video so that I know that you're interested in seeing this. Now, let's get started. So let's bring up Xcode and create a new project. I'm going to select a game template here since we're going to create a 3D game using the game technology SceneKit, of course. And I'm going to name my project Hit the Tree and save that on my desktop. And with that being done, we're going to do some cleanup here first. I'm going to resize my window and then we have a look at what is already here. So we have an art assets folder that includes a demo ship and the texture for this ship, and we're just right-clicking this and delete the whole art assets folder. We're also going into the game view controller and we're going to remove everything from view to load. So just remove that. We're going to delete the handle tab function. We're going to keep should auto rotate and set this to false since this is going to be a portrait only game and prefers status bar hidden. We will keep that at true so that there is no status bar, and we're also going to delete the supported interface orientations variable right here. So we have a very clean game view controller file here that doesn't do anything special really at the moment. Two more things that we'd like to do here is first of all removing the import for Quartz Core since we're not using it, and then we're going to add one little function that we're going to call setup scene, since we're going to use it to set up our scene later, and we're going to call this function in view.load. And these are all the preparations that we're going to make. And if you have downloaded the assets folder, then you will find one folder in this assets folder that is called art.scn assets, which includes all the images that we're going to need. So for example, we get the ball diffuse image, the normal map, and the comic skybox, which we're going to use. I'm going to explain what these things are for in a moment. And we'll also have some sound files here that we could include if we were to build this game. So now what I want to do is drag and drop this art assets folder into my Hit the Tree project. Make sure that copy items if needed is selected, and also let's make sure to add this to our target here. And with that we get our files into our project, and this is also where we're going to store all of our 3D models. So I'm going to select my project now, hit Command N on the keyboard, and then we can select a new file because we are going to start creating something very simple, which is our ball that we're going to use to hit the trees. And we're going to use the SceneKit scene file to create such a 3D model now. And I hit Next here. And now what I'd like to do to make sure that my ball is also stored in my art assets folder, I simply select this group here in my window for the new file. And I'm also going to call this file ball, hit create, and we're done. And now we are in the SceneKit Editor. And what we can do here is open up this little graph view, which is our scene graph. And as you can see, it already includes a camera. And since we are going to use a reference to our ball later, we're going to delete this camera since we only want to have one camera later in our main game scene, which could be our level. So when you're using references, such as we are going to do now, make sure to delete this camera because it's just a little bit disturbing. And for the ball, we are going to use a simple sphere. So I'm adding or typing sphere into the search window here in the lower right corner in my object library, and I can just drag and drop a sphere into my SceneKit editor. And as you can see now, this is really boring, kind of boring, since it's just flat white and we cannot really see a 3D effect at the moment, but we're going to change that. But when you have a very close look, what you might also detect is that we have some edges here that makes this ball not really round. And this is because this ball is made of segments, and we can increase the segment count here in our attributes inspector and just increase that to 36, which makes it a lot more round, and this is completely sufficient for our sphere here. What we also want to do, first of all, before we start doing or adding some imagery here, we're going to rename this sphere to ball. And this change should also be reflected in our scene graph right away. And then, since we are here at the moment, you can see this is the node inspector. We're going to zero out all the position values and put our ball at the origin of our coordinate system, which is 0, 0, 0. And then I have to zoom out a little bit, holding the Option key and just using my scroll wheel on my mouse. And now this is our ball. Looks still very boring. So what we'd like to do is bring up the material inspector. And for the diffuse properties here, I can just open that up. We could just select a color like a green. But this doesn't really make it look cool, does it? So what we can do now is apply a material, which is our ball diffuse image. And already this looks a lot cooler because we have this material applied here. And at the moment, we cannot really see a great structure here. And this is because we have not yet added the normal map. And the normal map, if you have a look at this, these colors represent depth in our image. So once we are adding this normal map to our material inspector here, or to our ball, we can just have a look at this, and once we're adding light to our scene later, we should get a really nice feel or nice depth effect for our ball. I'm just going to illustrate that in the video again, because as you can see here, when we're having a look at our ball, you can clearly see all the scratches and the depth of these scratches in the image. So this is really cool, and responsible for that is the normal map or the image that we're applying here. And so that we get a nice reflection, we're also adding a specular, which we're setting to white. And as you can see immediately, we get this little highlight here in our preview. And because we have no lights here in our scene graph of our ball, we cannot see that in this 3 model in the SceneKit editor, but we're going to see that later. And the last thing that we should change about our ball is the size. At the moment, it has a radius of 1, and we're going to reduce that to a radius of 0.3, because for our game, this is going to be completely sufficient. And it already looks a lot cooler than the white sphere that we had at the beginning. Just a little comparison here. So creating a ball was quite simple, actually, and we're going to move on doing something a little bit more complicated, like the trees that you've already seen. And we're also going to build them directly in Xcode using the SceneKit Editor. And I'm going to select my project now again, hitting Command N on the keyboard, scroll down a little bit here and selecting the SceneKit scene file, hitting Next, and I'm going to call this file tree. And again, I make sure that as a group, I select the art SCN assets folder so that all my assets are in one place. And here we have our ball, and now we also have our tree here. And our tree actually consists of 2 things, a box and a cone. So we're going to start out with the box. So I'm tipping box into my object library, just drag and drop that right here. And just as our sphere, this doesn't really look cool or interesting, nor does it look like a tree stem. So we're going to change that first. We're going to adjust the size here, and I'm going to go with a width of 0.15, a height of 0.5, and a length of 0.15. So this is going to be the stem of our tree. And as for the position, I'm also going to zero all of these values out. Just hit 0, 0, 0, and then we have positioned it right at our coordinates system origin, and then we can make some adjustments to the material. And in that case, I'm not going to apply any material in form of an image, for example. I'm just going to go with a nice color and select a dark brown for my tree stem, and I'm also going to give that a specular of white so that we can get reflections, and I'm going to keep it that way just to keep it simple for now. And now for the green of our tree, we're just going to add a cone. So I'm hitting cone in my object library search, and I'm just going to drag and drop that into my scene here. And then I'm also going to make some adjustments here. First of all, changing the diffuse color to a nice green color, maybe something like that, and also giving it a specular of white. And then we just have to position it a little bit. So first of all, I'm going to zero out the X, Y, and Z coordinate, but now I can just use this green arrow here and just pull at it and move it just in Y direction until I'm satisfied with the position, and I'm going to go with 0.75. And if I press Command on my keyboard, then it kind of locks on quarter steps. So I'm going to put that down to 0.75 again. And as you can see, this really looks like a tree. And now I'm going to bring up my scene graph, and just as we did with the camera in our balls SCN file, we're also going to remove the camera from this scene graph as well. And with that, we have now already created two 3D objects, a more comic-like tree and a very photorealistic ball that has everything that it needs to look cool. A great diffuse image, a great normal map to add depth, and now it's time to create our main game scene so that we can combine everything that we have created so far. However, there's one quick adjustment that I'd like to make. I'd like to open the tree scene again, and using the little plus icon in the lower left corner of our scene inspector here, and once I click that, I get an untitled node. And the cool thing about that is that I can just select both the box and the cone, put that into my new untitled node, and just give that the name of tree, so that we have one nice little node that we can later add and also talk to, and this is going to be our tree. So with that said, now let's really focus on the main scene. So I'm selecting the Hit the Tree project, again pressing Command N on my keyboard, and then selecting the SceneKit scene file, hitting next, calling it main scene, selecting my art SCN assets folder as my group, hit create, and we have our main scene. And if we have a look, what we have here in our scene graph is that there is already camera. We're going to keep that one because we're going to use it later. And as you can see, it really looks kind of plain everything, just as it did with all of the other files that we created. But to get a nice environment, something that we can do is called using a skybox. And skyboxes are really cool, and as you can see, this is our skybox. It looks a little bit strange, but only as long as you do not know what we're dealing with here. So once we're having a look at this skybox in another way, you will find out that we actually have 6 equally sized squares here that represent different faces of a cube map. So the first 2 are responsible for the X directional faces. So the second 2, the plus Y and negative Y images are responsible for what we're seeing at the top and the bottom of our cube. So when we're looking up, we're looking towards a blue sky, and when we're looking down, we're looking towards a little brownish, yellowish color. And the same is true for the positive and negative Z direction. So let's see how this looks once we apply that to our main scene. The way to do that is just selecting the main scene, opening up the scene inspector, maybe selecting one node first, and as soon as we did that, we can choose a different background and lighting. And at the moment, we just have this gray color. We could also change that to green, but we can also select our comic Skybox, and immediately it looks like we're placed at the center of a box, and when we're looking up, indeed, we're seeing our sky, and when we're looking down, we're seeing our ground, and we can even see kind of a horizon here in the very far. And this is really cool and a very simple technique using such a skybox and map that to your environment. So this is all we need to do for that. Now, what we also need is adding a floor. And the cool thing about that is once we type that into our object library, we can just drag and drop this floor to our scene. And this is an infinite plane, which also has kind of a reflection support. And we're of course not keeping that white. We're going to change the material, the diffuse color of our floor to a nice green color, so that it looks like we have a grass surface here, and we're going to place some trees on that later. But first, let's maybe add our ball. And the cool thing about what we did so far is that we can simply drag and drop something like our ball from our art SC and assets folder into our main scene. So I just click and drag that to my scene here, and boom, we have our ball reference right in our scene. And now we just have to be a little bit careful so that we do not place our ball reference into another node. So I do not want this to be a child of floor, so I'm just clicking and dragging that a little bit to the left so that it is its own node. And as you can see, it just is kind of below or in the center of our floor. Once we click on the floor, you can see that the floor is actually at the position 0, 0, 0, and we can just change that a little bit for the ball, placing that at x0, y, let's say 0.5, to let it levitate a little bit over the ground, and a z position of 0. So as you can see, we also have this nice reflection down below. But at the moment, we still cannot see the structure of our ball, and we can change that by finally adding some light. And since we're going to deal with two lights here, an omni-light and an ambient light, we're going to create a new node here, a new child node, by clicking on the plus icon and add that to our scene graph. And I'm just going to call that static light. And to that static light node, I'm going to add two lights. First of all, an omni light, just searching for that in my object library, placing it right in my static light. So I'm going to put that right here. And as you can see, we have now a new group or a new child node. And this already looks a little bit different, but we're going to change that in a second. And what I also would like is adding an ambient light. So also dragging that to my static lights. And as you can see, this again looks totally different from what we've seen so far, but especially in the reflection, you can definitely see the structure of our ball and the structure that is defined by this normal map. So this is pretty cool already. But I'm not really satisfied with how our scene looks at the moment, so we're going to start by changing the ambient light. And since this illuminates the scene equally in every direction, as it also states in the object library, we can keep that at the position 0, 0, 0. But in the attributes inspector, I can choose a different color, and I definitely want to go for not such a dark gray color, but a much lighter gray color. And as you can see, this already changes the whole look of the scene tremendously. So with that done, we can now also change the OmniLight. And here, positioning makes a huge difference, because if you have a look at the definition of the OmniLight, it illuminates the scene from a point in every direction. And we have to define this point. So I can move that upwards. And as you can see, this immediately changes how our ball looks, because suddenly it gets some reflection. And this is really cool, or it gets this light reflection, and we can clearly see the structure of our ball. And I'm going to just position it somewhere here at X0, maybe position it a little bit more at the top, let's say 5, and this gives our scene a really nice look at the moment. As you can see here in the center, we have a much brighter color, and when we're having a look at the horizon, it's getting darker already. Now, if you have wondered about these lines, these bluish lines that we can see here crossing our scene, then this is actually the camera. And if we scroll a little bit to the right, you can see there is indeed a camera. I can also zoom into that camera. And the cool thing is, once we select that, we get a lot of information about that. And what we see here, actually, these lines represent the field of view of our camera. And I'm actually going to a field of view of 60 here, and we actually do not have to move ourselves into the camera's position to actually get a feel for what the camera sees. We can just use the bar at the bottom here and change our point of view by clicking on that perspective. And this is out of my recording area at the moment, but at the very bottom you will find the scene points of view like the camera. And if I click on that, then we can exactly see what the camera sees. And we can also change what the camera sees in the node inspector. For example, we can zero out also the angles here, and once I go into my perspective, you can see that it now looks straight into the horizon without any angle, and we can also see that it is not positioned near the origin, so I'm going to set it to X0, Z0, or maybe a little bit behind of our ball. So let's maybe change that to, let's say, +5, or maybe just 3. And then also let's give it an angle of 30, -30, just so that it, no, that's too much. Let's say -15. And then let's have a look at the camera's perspective. And now this is what we actually see. And we can make all of these adjustments in the node inspector. So I'd like to have the height of 1.5. So I just adjusted that here. And with the camera now in place, I can actually drag in my trees, just the same way I did with my ball. So I'm just dragging and dropping a tree into my scene. And again, what I did accidentally was dropping it into my floor. So I'm just dragging it out of my floor in the scene graph, and that's it. So if we have a closer look now at our tree, let's just position it maybe at X0 so that it is centered nicely. And let's bring it a little bit closer. Is that once we go back to the perspective mode, and zoom in a lot of the tree is actually below our floor, so we can just move that up using the material, the node inspector, or we can also use these green arrows here in our scene. But I'm going to go with the node inspector here and just change the Y position slightly. So let's set it to 0.25 so that it stands exactly on the surface. And as you can see, we also have this nice reflection here. We have some light effects. We have a darker back of the tree and a brighter front. So this is already pretty cool. And we can just add as many trees as we want. So a nice trick here is that I can again press Command on my keyboard to let it snap into my guidelines here. And if I just want to add multiple trees or copy that tree, I can press the Option key and drag in a specific direction, and then I can just copy this reference of my tree. And I'm going to be satisfied with these trees now, with these 3 trees, having a look through my camera, and we can see a ball and some trees. So a very nice game level for the game that we could create. And what I'd like to say now to conclude this tutorial is just a quick note on these references, because we just worked with them without any thought. And the cool thing about these references is that once we make a change to one of them, so let's say maybe we want to add another, we want to add apples to our tree, so I could use another sphere for that, change the size, let's say to 0.05. So this would be a rather huge apple. Change the color to red and the specular to white. And then once I position that somewhere here in my on my tree, so somewhere around there, let's say that's my apple, and save that. And once I go back into my main scene, all of my trees should have an apple attached to this cone right here. And this is pretty nice because you can make these changes even if you are in a pretty advanced state of your game, or you can, again, delete this apple, save it again, go back to the main scene, and the apples are gone. And by now, you have acquired a lot of knowledge that is going to help you design your own 3D game levels. You have seen how you can create simple models within Xcode without the need of any third-party 3D application. And now all that is missing is bringing all of that onto a device, or in our case, the simulator. Because we can only see our scene or our game level in the SceneKit Editor. And we make some changes now to the game view controller that are going to display all of our scene on a device. So therefore, we're opening up the game view controller again, and we create two properties for this class. So first of all, we are going to create a scene view, which is an SCN view object, and a scene, which is an SCN scene object. And as you can see, this is a standard view controller. We just have a UI view controller with a scene view in it. So we do not have a UI view, but a scene view. So what we need to do in the setup scene function is first of all get this view. So we're using our scene view property, and we assign self.view, and we cast that to an SCN view. And with that, we can also use this scene that we have created and initialize it with an SCN scene object. And here we need to specify the directory or the name of our file with the folder path. So in our case, this is in the art.scn assets folder, and the file is named mainscene.scn. And with that, we can go ahead and use our scene view and its scene property and simply assign our scene. And let's quickly build that and then run that in the simulator. One thing that we might want to consider before running is, again, using our scene view and use the allows camera control property and set this to true, since we did not implement any logic for the camera to move or rotate. We can use that to have a look around our scene. And now I'm going to build that and run it in the simulator. So here we go. And there you have it. There is the scene that we have just created. We can move around. We can also zoom in and have a look at our ball, which has this nice structure. We can clearly see the reflections, and it is normal that it feels kind of slow because we're actually using hardware acceleration here. So if you test that on a physical device, this is going to run a lot smoother than in the simulator. But as you can see, this is quite satisfying, and we have a nice game level here. So if you have liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Also, write down in the comments below if you'd like to see how the game that I showed you earlier is built using the game scene, the game environment that we've created in this video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe if you do not want to miss any future tutorials, and I'll see you in the next one.